Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary, the podcast about tending the soul of women, sisterhood, and the rise of the sacred feminine. I'm your host, Arlia Hoffman. Welcome, everyone, to the Women's Sanctuary. A sanctuary is a safe, holy space where we gather. Here we come to hear women's stories of transformation and how they live their purpose in the world. We also cover topics of soul care and aligned living. And welcome to the sanctuary. Today I have a very special guest, a friend, Anh Chi Pham of Chi Yoga Wellness. And Anh Chi and I met at the Awakening Women's Institute. And I don't know how far back that was.
Probably like 6 years ago. I think it was 14 to 16,
that
something
sounds about
like
right.
Yeah.
2014. And I remember my first impression was hearing what you did and going, ooh, that is so niched. Like, I want to find out how you got into doing what you do.
Mm.
And then my next thought was, and I need to figure out how to say her name because I'm so aware of the power of saying someone's name correctly, because it impacts my life, and I always feel like I want to honor other people in doing that, the same thing. So let's dive in. Anh Chi is a certified yoga therapist and yoga instructor. She started yoga in 1999 to heal a fractured L2 vertebrae and realized right away that yoga helps her be happier, calmer, and more present. Her teaching is an embodied blend of both the physical and spiritual aspects, as well as informed by the latest discoveries in the sciences of movement, breathing, nervous system regulation, and healthy aging. Anh Chi encourages students to foster an attitude of curiosity, playfulness, and inquiry while on their mats. Her style incorporates self-massage, functional movement drills, core awareness, and engagement so that students stay strong and supple. Breath and relaxation practices are skillfully guided so that students can experience more ease in mind, body, and spirit. These are the practices and skills that have helped her to heal from chronic back, neck, and pelvic pain. She is honored to be certified from many top teachers and schools, including Amy Wheeler, Jill Miller, Shelley Prosko, Leslie Howard, Annie Adamson, HeartMath, Kripalu, Loyola Marymount Yoga Therapy, and the Krishnamacharya, thank you, Yoga Mataram in Chennai, India. And she continues to practice, learn, and grow. Welcome, Anh Chi.
Thank you, Arlia, for having me on the podcast.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm happy that we have some sun after a few days of rain. And, today is my day where I only have one class. So it's nice to have time to do some self-care.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot in the last few days. How do you balance your self-care and your work?
Well, I think I try, but I think having a loose routine is helpful. And I say loose because when I try to have a rigid one, it just feels like another to-do list. Mm-hmm. So I'm flexible, but there are, basic things that I prefer to do before I start my morning. And the flexibility is around, how long I do my somatic meditation for. Sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's shorter, and sometimes I skip it, like this weekend when I was traveling. So,
do you mind sharing kind of what your morning looks like what that self-care looks like for you first thing in the morning?
Sure. Well, right now my self-care routine starts out around 5:30 to 6 in terms of waking up. And I always have a warm cup of water. I do this movement series that I learned from a teacher named Uma Dinsmore-Tully. She teaches a style it's called womb yoga. And so in the morning, I usually do these standing movements to loosen up the spine, loosen up the whole midline, as well as connecting my feet to the ground. Like a lot of those womb movements actually really awaken the engagement of the feet. So it's very grounding. And then I also do Donna Eden's daily energy medicine routine. And that takes about 5 minutes. And that sequence with the standing movements of the spine takes about 5 minutes as well. And then I have my coffee, which is now decaf. I'm trying, or half and half. I'm trying to.
I know that struggle well.
Yes, it just tastes so good. But, sometimes I definitely can tell my nervous system is telling me, hey, I'd like some Tulsi tea instead. Mm-hmm. And so there is that little inner
negotiation.
Yeah. The mouth's like, I really like some espresso. And the body's like, no, give me some Tulsi and green tea. So there's a little dance around that. And what's been really helping me after doing all those little, easy ones is sitting down and doing 30 minutes of continuum movement. It's a somatic system that I studied with the teacher back in LA, and it's basically just using sound and open attention, where you just kind of drop in and just feel your body, your energetic body, and then you just follow movements as they arise. And it's been really helpful for me as a way to connect with myself, mm-hmm. and to feel more grounded. So
I love that you're, and I've always known that about you and appreciated that about you, that you're, as a yoga instructor, your first approach is through the body and mm-hmm. The embodied practice. And while I work with that, I generally have to bring myself to the body, because my first approach comes through the mind or through the spiritual work. And they're like, yeah, and I need to do the body work too. Like that's feels like your entry point. Right. Mm-hmm. And for me, my work is about making sure I include the body and do the work through the body. Because I'm kind of all up here most of the time. And I didn't mention that for a while, you recently moved to my city, and we reconnected, and we're doing for a while the women's temple practice until COVID, mm-hmm. which was really rewarding. I mean, I think you and I bring different approaches, and I just loved the complementary feeling of working together in that way. So what brought you to the temple work at Awakening Women?
I think one of my friends introduced me to Shamali and Women's Temple. And I'm not sure what the impetus, but I started becoming more interested in that work. And so I immediately bought the manual, and I read through the manual, and it just sounded so amazing, although the practices. And so it really resonated with me. And I think, just reading through the manual, I knew right away that I wanted to do the teacher's training, and I signed up for the next training that was available that was close. I did the one in Nevada City.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really, yeah.
Yeah. It was similar for me, just this instant recognition that this was something I was aligned with.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, this is the question I ask, and I'll give you some background. How did you get here? Like, that's my big curiosity. Like, here you are now as a yoga instructor with the temple training and the work that you do. Chart your path at in whatever points you feel are important to how you got to doing this work in the world.
Well, I lived and worked in San Francisco in the late 90s when yoga was everywhere. And back then I was very much in my head. I worked as a management consultant initially, and then I think when I started yoga, I was a brand manager at Power Bar Nestle. So I finally decided to check out the local yoga class, which was literally a block from my house. And somehow I ended up in not a beginner's class. It was a flow class where people were moving from pose to pose. And I was late, of course, and the class was crowded, and I snuck myself in, in the middle of the room, and there must have been at least 30 plus bodies in the room. It was like literally mat to mat. And the teacher just, was just calling out poses, and people were just moving from pose to pose, and I had no idea what the poses were, and I just kept flopping around trying to mimic the movements. And for some reason, I thought it was more embarrassing to run out than to stay. And so I stayed for the full 90 minutes.
Wow.
Flopping around, lost. And there was part of me that really was like, I think I could do okay if I actually learned how to do the poses. Anyway, so I ran out with my tail between my legs, thinking, it would be for me if they slowed down and I could learn the poses, but there's no way I can learn in that environment. And so I thought yoga's not for me. But when I left,
that would be my conclusion.
Yeah. And that's the conclusion, that we tend to make after we try something once, like we're not aware that there's other types of classes. So as I was, quickly putting on my shoes to run out before anybody else could get out in the lobby, I saw a flyer that the teacher advertised for a class for back care. And unfortunately, about 2 weeks later, I had a freak accident with a tree falling in Golden Gate Park. And I couldn't run away from it in time. So a part of the tree, probably just a small branch, hit me on the head, kind of like a nail and hammer action, and broke my lumbar spine. So luckily, the injury didn't require surgery. I had to wear a brace for 6 weeks, and I did PT. And then after that, I remembered the back care classes. And that's how I came back to yoga and really loved it. And it was such a incredible invitation, for me, because as someone who was very much in their head, I was a nerd in high school and very much identified with my thoughts and, just all of the westernized way of seeing ourselves in the world. It was really such a salve for me, like just to go to yoga class and check out and not be in my mind and just completely focus on the body. Granted, back then it was still very, very achievement focused, how do you master this pose and all of that. But just having that opportunity to learn left from right. And so I felt back then that yoga was a vacation, a mini vacation. And then eventually what happened was I started to, just to do a lot of self-inquiry. I also started Buddhist meditation and recognized that this was my third corporate job. I basically went to the corporate world after college, and I recognized that it wasn't really the job, like it was the whole lifestyle that I didn't want to do anymore. And when I think it was like about a year or so after I started yoga and meditation, I had this epiphany that, all my life when I was a child, I really just wanted to be a writer. Mm-hmm. And I never thought that it was possible because you're an immigrant and, you have to, make money and do that whole immigrant path. And so I had this realization that was just a construct and I didn't have to do it. So I quit my job and decided to become a writer. And after about 10 years of writing, I basically didn't have any more money left. It was a wonderful time as an artist on one level, but also just trying to figure out, like, how do you make it work financially? Mm-hmm. So I was still practicing yoga when I was writing, and with my last few $1,000 in savings, I took my money and took a yoga teacher training at Kripalu, and that's how I started teaching. So,
and how does that feel? More aligned, more rewarding, or just more you than the writing?
I love the teaching because it helped me get out of my head and, the yoga, whereas with the writing, it just became too much burden with expectation. And, it was all head work, right? With the writing, although, there were practices, obviously moving and all of that helps with creativity as well. What I love about teaching yoga is that it's not just about me. It's about, I feel like in any particular class, it's co-created. Like the classes that I love the best are the ones where there's this kind of this palpable energy between the students and I, and there's like this co-creation that happens. So that's, with the writing, I guess there is connection with the readers, but it's not live. Right. The readers are reading on their own time.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Tell me what you teach, and let's start with that.
Yeah, well, unlike what my, business mentor coach has recommended that I do, I haven't really had a focus, but I think a lot of what I teach is what I need to learn. So after having the back injury, I had a couple of other back injuries, and so obviously back care is something that I had to learn, and it's a trial and error process in terms of figuring out what works best for my body. And so learning the self-massage work with Jill Miller's system was really, really empowering. One of the empowering tools, because I recognized right away that was something that can really help me break out of cycles of pain. And so self-massage is a big part of what I teach. And then I started to learn a lot about pelvic health as well, because some of my injuries impacted the functioning of the pelvic floor muscles. And there's such a connection, again, with the pelvic floor and the spine. So I've taught, it's one of my favorite programs is a women's circle format. It was like a 6-week program that I taught where we basically learned about the pelvic floor, pelvic health, but there was a combination of yoga poses and women's circle practices. And we also delved into creativity and, art. And so I love breaking out of just the traditional weekly yoga classes and doing things that are a little bit more creative as well.
Yeah, and that's the piece I heard you describe in temple training. It was like pelvic floor. How does, that, I guess that's my innate curiosity going, how does someone get to that work? That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I'm taking notes on some of the resources you're referencing. I'd like to include those in the show notes so people can check out womb yoga or Joe Miller or the things that may appeal to them. So you talked about the injury that got you in your first experience in yoga. Were there any other pivotal moments that have really shaped where you are now?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So around the time where I started doing yoga, I was also feeling, very stuck in my life. And a friend of mine recommended that I do something called the Landmark Forum. And I resisted, thinking it's a cult, blah, blah, blah. And then I finally just really heard her and recognized that she was just offering a tool for me and just telling me, introducing me to something that she thinks that can really help me. And so I just thought, okay, why not just be open to it? And I did the forum. And what was so powerful for me about the forum, because I was, very much this, again, very in my head, very judgmental, your typical, like, I'm a type A, sick, quote unquote, person in the world. And during the first 2 days of the forum, people would do the practices, come back and report like all these amazing breakthroughs that they were having with their family and relationships. And the tendency that I always had is obviously to compare myself to others and then judge my experience based on how I was ranking myself to others. And the leader, before we took a break, she always asked us, okay, where are you in this experience of the forum? Are you up high? Are you, feeling really excited and you're making a lot of breakthroughs? And of course, some people would raise their hands. And then she would always ask, and what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. Don't make it mean anything. And then she would ask, okay, and are you down below? And then some people would raise their hands. And then again, she would say, don't make it mean anything. And I was the person who was always like tepid, like in the middle, and then she said, don't make it mean anything. And so it really gave me access. Like, no one ever told me that I could just be with my experience without making a story about it.
Right.
And so throughout those first 2 days, I just didn't make a story about it. I just was present and did all the exercises. And, it was freedom to recognize that I didn't have to judge my experience. And that Saturday night when I was home in my own apartment, I was reading through my journal entries. And it was like this aha moment where I recognized that my suffering at that time, I was like 27, single, didn't like my job. And I was really like suffering from all of that. And I recognized that I was just making it mean something, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that you're single, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that you hate your job. There's nothing wrong with your life. Like, you've got a roof over your head. There's nothing wrong with my life. And when I just dropped the burden of all of that thinking, everything in the room around me just became more vibrant and alive. It felt like I took a hit of, ecstasy, which I hadn't yet. But it felt like it felt like a drug, and everything just vibrated and became more alive. And I experienced that kind of state of just openness. I don't know how you would describe it, for, a couple of weeks, where it was just like everything was just a beautiful flow, and my heart felt open, and I just felt really connected to the vibrancy of life within everything. And that was how I became interested in meditation. Mm-hmm. And, in the traditional yoga path, obviously, actually in the traditional path, yoga is about the mind. Meditation is a big part of yoga. But when I started meditating, I went to the Zen center, and so most of my meditation training is started in the Buddhist path, but that has really informed, just how I teach, what I teach as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so beautiful, and I see the connection with the work we do in Temple, which is about presence, about dropping the story, which was I was aware of, but that really brought it home and embodied it for me to be able to become present in the body and let go of the mind and recognize stories for what they are. I think is beautiful. It is in one way, it is the essence of presence. Is to really be not there, but in the body, and just aware and open, as you said, this openness to what is and what you're experiencing, and not judging it. That's extraordinarily powerful and important. I guess it can be done without the body. I don't know how you do it without the body. Without the body awareness, I think that's essential as well.
Yeah.
When you mentioned when you were first in the landmark experience, you were doing a lot of comparison, and I had a deeper level of that epiphany lately about how to step out of comparison. Did you find that was that kind of dropping into the presence and openness allowed you to let go of comparison? Do you want to speak to that, about how you experience that, and how you deal with that if it comes up?
Yeah, I think that's just what the mind does. It's always comparing, and so for me, just recognizing that I didn't have to believe those automatic tendencies are huge, and it's still something that I work with. Like for me, another place where that energy of comparison comes up really strongly is when I'm within groups of women. And I guess I just never, there's a whole background with that, but I recognize like that would come up really strongly whenever I did like any kind of yoga training, because there's just it's mostly women. And I think just that practice of just being present to notice when your insecurities are on, and then just giving that space and recognizing that it might be this deep pattern where somehow women are taught to distrust each other. So I think recognizing that it's not like a personal failing, when that comparison mind happens, and just really leaning into the the vulnerability of that, and really, I think recognizing when we feel in a way unsafe, and being tender with that part of ourselves, and just giving that part of ourselves our awareness and our attention.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned feeling unsafe. I would imagine that is really the seed of both comparison and competition, which is something we work with in Temple to release those notions and create a safe container where we recognize that, the woman before us is a complete and whole being, and there is no competition among women. I mean, you can create it, but there's no need for it. And to create a safe container where we can trust each other and let go of, like, I see all of those as interwoven, right? The safety and the comparison and the competition. It's, I guess it's perpetual. It's a perpetual awareness to dismantle that. I know for me, recently I was struggling a bit with how I do my work in the world, and my sense of my imposter syndrome. And I realized I was still just constantly comparing myself to others and looking outside myself for guidance.
Yeah. I hear you. And that's where I get caught, is I just get caught with quote unquote work and going into comparison mode and judging, and yeah. So I think it's I don't know why that pattern is so strong. I think part of it is just a way of perpetuating a small sense of self, the ego construct. That's just how it continues itself. And so
that's a great observation. Yeah. I mean, I was going to say it's the water we're swimming in, but it is also, that's how the ego keeps its power.
Right.
Keeping us small and
just keep itself going. It's like, let's compare, and then because then you create a boundaried self, versus one that is boundaryless. So
I love that. Yeah, I've often used the metaphor of we live in a castle, but the ego wants to lock us in a dark broom closet. Right, this very small dark room, and this is these are the confines of our life, and that's what it feels safe with.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. I also recently had this experience of in a meditation journey of actually experiencing boundarylessness, formlessness, and I think that. If you can in some way touch that, it just reminds you that the ego's in a broom closet. It definitely serves us. Yeah. I don't think we're going to get rid of it.
I don't. Yeah. I mean, supposedly for some people that part doesn't run anymore because they don't give it energy. But yeah.
So what are you doing these days? What is your teaching look like?
Well, right now I am currently teaching over at Emory Wellness Center, and we are shut down. So I'm teaching Zoom classes for them. And most of the students at the Emory Wellness Center are older. So a lot of the focus is on, healthy aging, balance, how to keep strength and stability. And then I also teach a couple of classes at a smaller studio called Decatur Healing Arts. But what's And then I teach restorative yoga as a community-based, donation-based class on Sundays, which is on hiatus for the summer, but I will restart it. And what I'm feeling called with that restorative class is to combine temple work with restorative, because I think that quality of deep listening, mindful speaking, and connection is so needed during this time. So I'm going to introduce, some temple work to my restorative students.
And is that local or is that online?
It's going to be online. It's, most of the students that take that restorative class are my California students. So that's one way that I stay in contact with them. So it's going to be, available to my email list. And then depending on what's going on with the COVID situation, my plan is to have it as a series over a decade of healing arts. But that class will be more movement based. It won't be restorative yoga. It'll be more of a flow style, like more active style.
That sounds beautiful. So if someone wanted to attend your restorative, do you have a name for that class yet?
I'm calling it the Rooted Heart Yoga and Community for Chaotic Times.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds beautiful. So if someone wanted to participate in that, could they do that? And how would they do that?
Well, the best way probably to reach me currently is through my Instagram account. And it's just Chi Yoga Wellness. So they can, direct message me through there. And I can add their email to the mailing list, and I can send out the links. I send out all the information about my classes through my emails.
Got it. Yeah, and we'll link that in the show notes so people can find you.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, I your energy comes across as, so grounded, so peaceful and present that that your classes just radiate that, and they're healing.
Thanks, Arlia. I feel like, again, we teach what we need to learn, and it definitely doesn't come naturally for me as well to really go into the body. And I think the journey that I've had with chronic pain, ironically, it's a calling, right? When we have pain, the tendency is to pull away from the body, and actually the only way out is in. And I think during this time when there's so much uncertainty and chaos, it's very beguiling, to just go further and further into the ethers and become more and more disconnected and lost within our conspiracy theories and our stories. And it's really vital to just keep it simple.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah.
So what's been your favorite or most used coping mechanism in the last 18 months? What has really helped you stay grounded through this process?
I think there's so many different practices that I do, but I'm very aware of what I need at the time. So one point when I was feeling a lot of fear, anxiety, I would do laughter yoga. So it's just lots of different ways to just shift the nervous system.
Okay, so I have to ask, what is laughter yoga?
You just laugh.
Okay.
There's actually a medical doctor in India that started it. And so you can attend classes where the facilitator will guide you into laughing. But I'll just make sure no one's around, and I will just literally like move and shake and scream and laugh and do that for about 5 minutes. And it really helps to release the crazies, as I call it.
That's
and
awesome.
Also just kind of shift your hormones, right? Because when we laughed, all the feel good, the endorphins, and
when my partner thinks I need to shift my energy, he shows me funny cat videos. He's like, here, you need to laugh.
Yeah.
And it works. It totally works.
Yes. No, laughter is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So, yeah.
Well, Anchi, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a really lovely conversation, and I hope people can feel that and feel your energy, and if they feel called, hop onto your new class. And I wish you just all the best, and a lot of peace and groundedness navigating this period in our common human experience.
Yes. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, Arlia. It was a lot of fun, and I'm honored to be featured as one of your guests. And it's great to see you and to connect with you again.
Yeah, I don't think we've been together in a year and a half or more.
Yeah. And
except for the time we met behind the yoga studio for me to give you toilet paper. Yeah, because I said, "What do you need?" And you said, "Well, actually," I was like, "I'm on it. I'm on it." Well, thank you, Anchi, for joining us. Join us next time to hear more women sharing their stories. If you enjoy these podcasts, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast provider. It helps people find us and helps our guests. I'm Arlia Hoffman, and this has been the Women's Sanctuary. For myself and Anchi, thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time here on the Women's Sanctuary.